Welcome back to Green Dolphin Science.
Great to be here.
This is the deep dive, where we take your sources and, well, we dive deep. Today, we're tackling plastic pollution.
A huge topic.
It is, but we're zooming in. We're looking at a really specific, really important place, a conservation area in Brazil. It's a critical home for Antillean manatees.
That's right. We're digging into a scientific paper, a recent one. It looked at beaches in the Microplastics estuary, that's the protected area, trying to figure out where plastic actually ends up.
And what kind of plastic it is.
Exactly. And what kind. So our goal today is to unpack what they found and, maybe more importantly, why it matters, especially for wildlife like manatees that are already quite vulnerable.
Okay, let's set the stage a bit. Plastic pollution, we know it's bad, but maybe remind us why estuaries are such a focus.
Sure. Well, plastic is, unfortunately, a global issue everywhere. But coastal areas and estuaries get hit particularly hard.
Because that's where people are.
Pretty much. You've got human activity, population growth, cities, all often concentrated near coasts. And estuaries, where rivers meet the sea, they naturally act like sinks.
Trapping things.
Yeah, trapping pollutants flowing off the land, coming down rivers, or washing in from the ocean itself. They're kind of collection points.
And the specific spot is the Mamaguape estuary in northeastern Brazil.
That's the one, Paraíba State. The paper mentions it's the second largest estuary in the state.
And it's important ecologically.
Hugely important. It's actually inside an environmental protection area.
Yeah.
The EPA, Barra de Mamaguape. It's an IUCN Category V protected area.
Okay.
Established back in '93. And its main goals were preserving mangrove forests and, crucially for us today, protecting manatee habitats.
So it's a designated manatee zone.
Very much so. It's a key home range for Antillean manatees. They use it for rehabilitation programs, reintroduction sites. It's really vital for them.
And these manatees, they're not doing too well generally, are they?
No, sadly not. Globally, the IUCN classifies them as vulnerable. But in Brazil specifically, their status is critically endangered.
Critically endangered.
Yeah.
Wow.
And a big part of that is habitat loss. Plus, remember how they eat. They're bottom feeders, spending their time grazing on submerged plants in these shallow estuary areas.
So even though it's a protected area, it's still facing threats. It's not pristine.
Right. It's protected, but not immune. The paper points this out, even with a relatively low population nearby, maybe 56,000 people. There's still significant human pressure.
Like what?
Things like sugarcane farming, shrimp farming nearby, urbanization, runoff from agriculture. And pollution doesn't just come from right there. Winds and currents can bring it in from other busier areas too. It's facing a mix of stressors.
Okay, that context is really important. So with all that going on, what was the specific question these researchers were trying to answer?
They wanted to look closely at the plastic debris on the beaches there, specifically meso and macroplastics. They wanted to know, what kind is there, how much is there, and does it pile up differently as you move along the estuary from the inside out towards the ocean?
How'd they actually measure that? Did they just, walk along and count?
No, a bit more systematic. They set up sampling sites in 3 different zones along that gradient.
Okay.
One site well inside the estuary, one in what they call the transition area, sort of near the mouth where it opens to the sea, and one on an ocean beach just outside the mouth.
Makes sense.
Then, over 7 days, back in August 2022, they used transects, basically straight lines, along the high tide mark. And along those lines, they put down these 1-meter square frames, quadrats.
And marking off little patches.
Exactly. And within each square, they carefully collected the top layer of sand, about 3 centimeters deep. They repeated this many times in each zone to get a good overall picture.
Right, scooping up that surface layer where things might collect. And what were they looking for in those sand samples?
They sorted through everything. They counted every piece of plastic.
Yeah.
They measured it to classify. Macroplastic was 5 millimeters or bigger. Mesoplastic was smaller, 2.5 to 5 millimeters.
Okay. Yeah.
They also noted the form, was it a filament, like a line? A fragment, like a broken piece?
Yeah.
Or a pillet, those little industrial beads?
Nurdles.
Possibly, yeah. And they even recorded the color. They have 13 different color categories. They wanted a really detailed breakdown.
Okay, so lots of careful collecting and categorizing. What was the big finding? Where did the plastic actually accumulate? Was it everywhere?
Well, first off, yes. Plastic was found on every single beach they sampled.
Yeah.
Both macro and mesoplastics. So it's definitely present throughout the area.
Not surprising, maybe, but still depressing. But I heard there was a twist. An unexpected hotspot.
Yes, exactly. This was probably the most striking finding. The highest density, the place with the most plastic per square meter, wasn't deep inside the estuary like you might initially think.
Yeah, where things might get trapped.
Right. Nor was it out on the open ocean beach.
Right.
No, it was overwhelmingly concentrated right there in the transition area, near the mouth.
Overwhelmingly. How much more are we talking?
We're talking a lot more. The density in that transition zone was roughly 7 to 10 times higher than in the other two zones.
7 to 10 times.
Yeah. Let's look at the numbers they reported. For macroplastics, the big stuff, it averaged around 20 pieces per square meter in the transition zone. Compare that to only about 3 inside the estuary and 7 on the ocean beach.
Wow.
And for mesoplastics, the smaller bits, it was even more dramatic. About 83 pieces per square meter in the transition zone versus maybe 8 or 9 inside the estuary and around 10 on the ocean beach.
That's a massive difference. So, okay, if the transition zone was packed, why wasn't there more plastic further inside the estuary? Isn't that where stuff is supposed to settle out?
That's a really good question, and it goes against some common assumptions. The authors suggest a couple of reasons why it might be lower inside the Mamangwape.
Okay.
One, they mention the population density right around the inner parts of the estuary is relatively low compared to other studied estuaries, and plastic levels often track with nearby population. So maybe just less local input right there. Second, they talk about morphodynamics, basically how the shape of the land and the water interact. They think erosion in some of the higher energy spots inside the estuary might actually be reducing the amount of stable beach area where plastic can settle and stay.
So maybe less coming in locally, and the beaches themselves are less stable for accumulation inside.
That seems to be the thinking, yeah.
All right, but then why is that transition zone such a magnet? What's special about that area near the mouth?
This is where it gets really interesting. The authors point to how ocean processes tides, river discharge, wind interact with the actual physical shape of the coastline there, the geomorphology.
Okay.
They note a few things. There's a line of reefs offshore that kind of buffers the wave energy right at the mouth. Winds are also stronger in that transition area, which could move stuff around, maybe bury some plastic. But the key factor they highlight, sand spits. There are sand spits, these sort of natural sandy points or barriers right in the estuary mouth.
And they trap things.
They hypothesize that these spits act as barriers, messing with the local currents, creating zones where water slows down or swirls, and plastic just gets concentrated and trapped there. It's like the geography itself creates this accumulation hotspot.
Fascinating. So the local plumbing basically directs the plastic there. What about the type of plastic? Did one type dominate?
Yes, definitely. Across all the beaches, the most common form by far was fragments.
Fragments, like just broken bits.
Yeah, the paper describes them as mostly solid, hard pieces, not bendy, like bits broken off larger items.
And was the mix different in that transition hotspot zone? More variety, maybe?
Good question. Yes, that transition site didn't just have the most plastic overall, it also had the biggest variety of plastic colors. Although, across all sites, the most common colors were white, blue, transparent, and green. And those other forms, pellets and filaments, they were also most abundant in that transition zone. Get this, the number of pellets they found just in the transition zone was almost the same as the total amount of all plastic types found in the inner estuary and ocean zones combined.
Whoa! Pellets again. The nurdles. Any idea where they came from?
The authors suggest the proximity to Cabadella Port, which isn't too far away. It might be a source, but they're cautious. They say more research is needed to really pin that down.
Right.
Yeah. But beyond pellets, they also found identifiable stuff, bits of styrofoam packaging, lollipop sticks, cotton swab sticks, pieces of drink bottles.
Everyday trash, basically.
Yeah, suggesting a mix of sources, some likely local urban waste, maybe discards from fishing or tourism right there. But they also acknowledge that stuff could be washing in from further away via currents, too.
Okay, let's connect this back to the manatees. They're critically endangered. Why is this pileup of plastic, especially these fragments and filaments, so bad for them?
This is the crucial link. That transition area, the one with 7 to 10 times more plastic, it's located right near important manatee feeding grounds.
Oh, no.
Yeah, areas with seagrass and algae beds that they rely on, and also places they tend to hang out frequently, what scientists call fidelity sites.
And they feed on the bottom?
Exactly. They're grazing along the bottom in these shallow zones. And this plastic is sitting in the beach sediment right there, easily washed into the feeding areas by tides and waves.
So they could just accidentally eat it while grazing?
Precisely. That's a major risk, accidental ingestion, mistaking it for food or just scooping it up with the vegetation. There's also the risk of physical damage from sharp pieces and entanglement, especially with filaments or fishing gear.
Has that actually happened there?
Sadly, yes. The paper mentions that other studies in this same estuary have documented manatee deaths linked to swallowing marine debris or getting tangled in fishing gear. It's not just a theoretical risk.
That's awful. Have other manatee populations shown similar problems, like in Florida?
Yes, it's a known issue elsewhere, too. Studies on Florida manatees found plastic in their digestive systems decades ago. More recently, some research suggested plastic might actually stick to the plants they eat, making it harder to avoid.
Ugh.
Although it's complex, another Florida study found direct plastic ingestion was responsible for a smaller percentage of deaths overall. But the fact remains, they do ingest it, they do get entangled, and the risk is clearly present.
And you mentioned fragments breaking down. Does that make things worse?
It creates a different, maybe more pervasive problem. Those fragments get battered by sun and waves, breaking into smaller and smaller microplastics.
Right.
And those tiny pieces are easily eaten by smaller animals, like fish. And guess what? Studies have found microplastics in fish from the Mamangwape estuary, so it's getting into the local food web.
And the study mentioned plastic mixed in with seaweed on the beach.
Yeah, another concerning detail. They found plastic bits tangled up in the piles of seaweed, the algal racks that wash ashore.
Why is that bad?
Because manatees might investigate those racks for food. And if there are brightly colored plastic pieces mixed in, they might mistake them for something edible. They specifically found lots of blue fishing filaments in those racks.
Fishing line.
Exactly. And we know Florida manatees have ingested monofilament fishing line. Plus, the tides washing over these beaches can pick up that contaminated seaweed and plastic and carry it right back into the water, into the feeding areas.
So this study, being the first of its kind there, gives a really important snapshot of the problem, a baseline.
Exactly. It's crucial baseline data for this specific protected area. It tells managers, okay, we have a plastic problem, and here's where it seems to be worst.
What should the people managing the EPA take away from this?
Well, it clearly shows a need for focused pollution management inside the protected area. It flags that transition zone as a high priority area for monitoring, maybe for cleanup efforts.
Because that's where it's piling up.
Right. And it highlights how natural forces can concentrate the problem. It also reinforces the risk even small bits of plastic on the beach can easily end up in critical manatee habitat just offshore.
Does the study leave questions open? Things we still don't know?
Oh, definitely. Science always leads to more questions. The authors themselves point out they need more sampling in other key spots, like the mangrove areas where manatees also spend time.
Okay.
And while they have a strong hypothesis about those sand spits acting as traps, they say more detailed research is needed to really nail down exactly how those features concentrate the plastic, confirming the mechanism.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've gone deep into this one study, this one estuary. For you listening, maybe thousands of miles away, what's the bigger picture here? Why does this local story matter more broadly?
I think it really drives home a few key points. First, it shows just how much local geography, tides, winds, the shape of the coast, things like sand spits, can dramatically control where plastic pollution ends up, even inside a protected area.
It's not just about where the trash starts.
No, it's also about where nature funnels it. It underscores how vulnerable specific habitats and species are, even a pollution that might travel a long way or just get concentrated by these natural processes. And it really highlights that plastic fragments and fishing gear, these common types of debris, are direct threats to wildlife through eating it or getting tangled.
So the big takeaway, this unexpected hotspot of plastic fragments and filaments right in the transition zone of the Mamangwape estuary poses a serious documented risk to the critically endangered manatees that depend on that very area.
That's the core message, yeah.
Yes.